Hello everyone, and welcome to this special NHL Trade Deadline 2015 edition of the Jason Hackam Sports Experience. I am joined by what's becoming, a regular here on the Jason Hackam Sports Experience, Sean Leahy of the Yahoo Puck Daddy blog. And Sean, thanks for joining me today.
You got it, Jason, anytime.
So Sean, I guess I can ask you, how was your day covering all the trades for Yahoo and everything? Because it was a pretty slow day.
Yeah, I mean, the last week has been busy with some bigger names getting moved leading up until today, but there were certainly a number of maybe second-tier players, getting moved around today, and so certainly up until even past the 3 p.m. Eastern deadline, there's plenty of movement, and certainly teams either trying to offload some players looking towards next year, and also some teams that are heading to the playoffs and looking for that one or two final pieces to put them over the top for a Stanley Cup run.
Yeah, exactly. So you did mention that. I mean, while today the actual trade deadline wasn't as super exciting, we had a lot of guys move before the deadline. Actually, I believe 18 trades before the deadline. Do you think this is a trend we're going to see going forward, Sean, with a lot of bigger deals getting done before the deadline?
Yeah, and I think it makes sense, right? If you're a team that's heading to the playoffs, or your team you're fighting to get into the playoffs, why wait until the deadline when some other teams could get desperate and throw the kitchen sink at somebody, say you're going for the same player. So, teams like the Blackhawks, over the weekend acquiring Tiemann and Antoine Vermette, getting ahead of the game, getting those guys in your room, while the teams that you're facing in your conference or your division or whoever you're fighting for, are left to scramble and potentially try and make a reactive trade to answer what you did. So certainly smart. Looking at the trades that were made leading up until today, it certainly was a lot of smart moves made by not only teams that are looking for the extra piece for a Stanley Cup run, but also teams that are already looking towards next year and are just looking to acquire some assets, for the future.
Sean, what would you say is the best deal that we saw throughout the whole trade deadline period? I mean, I guess to me, we couldn't, count that big Winnipeg-Buffalo Evander Kane trade. I would say that's the best one because it's two teams taking risks on a potential star in Winnipeg, sending him Evander Kane over to Buffalo, and then Buffalo's really just looking forward to the future.
Yeah, that was certainly a big one, and one of those rare deals that is very, very good for both sides, obviously for different reasons with the Jets trying to fight for a playoff spot and the Sabres, looking towards next year, and they're going to come back next season with a great piece in the Evander Kane. But I certainly like what the Maple Leafs were able to do, able to unload that David Clarkson contract and take on Nathan Horton's deal, and they were very, obviously things didn't work out with Clarkson there, so getting him off this cap and for them to be able to put on Nathan Horton's salary and cap it onto a long-term injury reserve will certainly help them going forward. And like I mentioned before, the Blackhawks bringing Tiemann, who, as long as he's 100% healthy from those blood clots, that's a great piece for their back end going forward, and as well as Antoine Vermette, who he's not the same elite two-way player that he was a few years ago, but he's still a solid guy, beast in the face-off zone, good on possession, and can certainly help them with some center depth as they try and fight their way out of that Central Division.
Sean, I guess I can now ask you, I mean, the trade deadline's come and gone. Which team would you say had a very successful trade deadline and looks to be strong contenders going forward? Because for me, I think the Blackhawks have kind of fixed the holes that they had from a couple weeks ago, and now that they've brought out with Kane, they got Vermette to kind of fill that up. I'd say Minnesota as well. Who else would you add in there?
I think I would toss in the New York Rangers for sure,
Yeah.
making that big deal yesterday, picking up Keith Yandel. Potentially gives them the best blue line in the league, and the fact that Yandel is signed through next season helps you. Granted, if you're going to get an elite player like Keith Yandel, a guy who can score from the back, you got to give up something. And the Rangers gave up a first-round pick, a second-round pick, John Moore, and also Anthony Duclair, who's a pretty highly prospect. We had a couple games for them earlier in the season and impressing folks. And but you get a guy like Yandel, who will probably immediately replace Dan Boyle as a power play quarterback. The Boyle signing didn't quite work out for them. And I think Yandel is certainly an upgrade. And right now, the Rangers, they look at last year, they came close to winning the Stanley Cup. Their window is slowly closing. Henrik Lundqvist is getting older. Rick Nash is having a career season. And the fact that the Eastern Conference is pretty wide open. Glenn Sather, this is him putting his chips in the middle and taking his chance and looking to make another run at the Cup for a second straight season.
I think the thing that you brought up there is kind of interesting is, the Rangers, they were one of the rare teams that you'll see in today's salary cap era and giving up a first-round pick to get a strong player like Keith Yandel. It's tough in the salary cap era to do superstar-style trades and give guys away like that. Are we going to see potentially less big names traded at the deadline because of the salary cap era?
I guess it depends. We've seen some teams who were handcuffed by the salary cap, like the Boston Bruins. If they had a little more room, Peter Chiarelli probably would have been able to make a couple moves leading up to the deadline. And certainly they're a team that's where they sit in the Eastern Conference, just in the playoffs with the Panthers right behind them. They would have loved to made an upgrade in the back or made a little bigger upgrades up front as opposed to acquiring Max Talbot and Brett Connolly. So I think it's just going to be a year-to-year thing how teams manage the cap going forward, especially next year. We still don't know whether it's going to go up a little bit or potentially go down, as Gary Bettman recently hinted. So whatever the number is, a year from now for the 2016 deadline will certainly be an indication as far as what kind of activity we're going to see, because we see teams make bad moves and it handcuffs them. They tie up a lot of salary, but then we see some other teams that kind of leave themselves some space, knowing that if we get our caps into this number, this will leave us a little wiggle room come the trade deadline where maybe we can add a piece or two and make another run to the Cup.
Now, Sean, at the opposite end of the spectrum, there's most teams here in the trade deadline, they try to get better. Well, there's teams like Buffalo and Arizona that were on the complete sell to try to get worse so they can potentially get the number one pick. Do you think this is something we'll see yearly? Or is this going to be another 10-year period only because they're trying to get so low so they can get a superstar like Connor McDavid?
Yeah, I think it's just the aspect of what the prize is, I guess, are at the end of the rainbow here. In Jack Eichel and Connor McDavid. These are guys who are touted as generational prospects. I don't think we've kind of seen this hype around the draft really since Sidney Crosby in 2005. So, and I know next year Austin Matthews is a pretty highly touted prospect, but I don't think he's anywhere near in the vicinity of an Eichel or McDavid. So I think this is what you get when you have those two kind of guys who have generational talents. You're going to have teams like Arizona and Buffalo selling off as many pieces as they can to put themselves in the best position to win the draft lottery in a month's time.
Now, Sean, the Maple Leafs, they were a team trying to get rid of some guys and some superstars with big contracts like your Dion Phaneuf and your Phil Kessels. They did get rid of Olli Jokinen today, which must have made Olli Jokinen the happiest guy in all of Toronto. I'm sure he flew out of Toronto. They weren't able to make the Phaneuf trade when Detroit balked at the price. Other than, I guess, the Clarkson for Horton deal, what do you like about the Maple Leafs' direction going forward?
It's going to be a slow process, and it started last summer when Shanahan brought in Kyle Dubas as the assistant GM. It was a shift in the organization's thinking going forward, and certainly it's going to take time. Whether Dave Nonis is the guy going forward or not, the reshaping of that franchise and that roster is going to take some time. And we saw a lot of the rumors potentially involving Dion Phaneuf today with the Red Wings. There's talk of Phil Kessel, but I think for where the Leafs are, they're not going to get near the top of the lottery leaderboard with Arizona, Edmonton, and Buffalo. So they're going to be up there, but they're not going to have the best percentage to win. So I think they're better off waiting until the draft if they're going to deal guys with enough, or even Kessel, guys with a lot of term and a lot of money coming to them, but also have some decent value attached to them where they can get some better assets in return, whether it's draft picks or prospects or even some young, cheaper roster players. So they have some nice pieces already. I mean, Morgan Riley's having a fantastic year. James Van Riem's 20-year-old guy, a lot to like there. Jake Gardner is still developing, but there's certainly a number of players who probably aren't going to be here in the long term, like you mentioned, and it's just going to take some time because this team has been in a deep rut for quite a while, and they dug the hole themselves. And like you mentioned, in the salary cap world where teams are so tight against the cap ceiling, and it's tough to maneuver, and you can't just dump salaries anymore. You got to make the money work, even if you're retaining salary. So it's going to take some time for release, but they certainly have the right people in charge to make that happen.
Now, Sean, do you think that the Maple Leaf fan base can handle more time? Because it seems like the problem with the Maple Leafs is and their fan base is they want results right here, right now. Whereas if you've seen teams that are having the success, like the Penguins and the Blackhawks and the Kings, it took 8 to 10 years for their success. Do you think we'll see a fan base willing to wait, and the guys in charge willing to wait out instead of the pressure from their fans? Because the market in Toronto is just unreal for pressure from the fan base.
I think, like I mentioned, they have the right people in place. I think if they're honest with their fan base and say this is what we're going to do, it's either a retooling, as some teams like to call it now, or just a full-on rebuild. As long as they're honest and the moves they make are smart and don't handcuff them for the future, like tying up tons of dollars for multiple years on term. I think it's okay, if this takes several years, especially in a market like Toronto where it's such a fishbowl existence, and every loss is magnified and every slump is blown up 100 times. So if they make the right moves, if they bring in some nice pieces for the future, I think the fans will be okay if this takes a few years to turn things right around.
My last thing, I guess, going forward with the Maple Leafs is Dave Nonis said today after the trade deadline expired that maybe they will move some of those bigger contracts in the offseason. Do you think we will see Phaneuf and or Kessel be in a blue and white sweater come the start of the 2015-2016 season?
I think of those two guys, I think Kessel, I'd like to see Kessel stay. I don't know why you want to trade a guy who can score you 35, 40 goals a season. I mean, he's only 27. He's not ancient. He's a great player. Who cares how his relationship is with the media? He's a guy who scores goals. He does his job. That's all you can ask him to do. I think enough. They were they were in kind of deep discussions today with the Red Wings and just couldn't come to an agreement on the package for Phaneuf. But I think with summertime, 29 other teams kind of know their cap situations going forward. I think there'll be somewhat of a market for Phaneuf, and I think of those two guys, I would peg Phaneuf as the guy to not be a Leaf at the start of next season.
Staying with another Canadian team, an original 6-1 at that, the Montreal Canadiens, they've made some nice moves over the week. They picked up Devontae Smith-Pelly, as well as they made some good moves today, I felt. Sean, what did you think of the Canadiens going forward? Because a lot of people have said that they're really just a mediocre team with great goaltending. I mean, do you buy that statement? And have the moves they made today changed your thoughts on that opinion?
Yeah, it's certainly better today, bringing on Jeff Petrie and, like you said, bringing on Devontae Smith-Pelly last week. But they certainly need a little jumpstart on offense. Carey Price has been phenomenal. He's played himself into the Hart Trophy conversation. He's the leader on a lot of people's ballots right now. Just the way he's been able to stop almost everything, despite the guys in front of him having a hard time scoring. I mean, among teams in the playoff spot in the Eastern Conference, they're 7th among goals scored. So that type of hockey sometimes works in the playoffs, but you need guys to score. And they certainly have the players on the roster to do that. Petrie will help their defense, but the guys up front certainly got to get things going if they're going to want to have a shot to get out of the Eastern Conference.
Sean, the Blues are a team that has had some issues, I guess, in terms of they've made big trades at the deadline and they never worked out. Was that the reason they didn't make a move for potentially a goalie, as they've had some goalie issues as of late, and or any other key players? I mean, they made a move today to pick up, I believe it was, what was his name? From Arizona, they picked up. Yeah, Mahalik. They picked up him from Arizona. Yeah, but they didn't do anything other than that. Is that from just previous negative effects from the deadline?
It could be that. It just could also be some of the prices where just, Doug Armstrong wasn't going to pay those no matter what. And especially if he was going to be looking for a goaltender with Jake Allen there, who's probably their guy for the future, and Brian Elliott signed for the next couple of seasons. The GM can sniff that out as the Blues being desperate and maybe try and squeeze Armstrong for a couple extra assets if they're looking for a goalie. But Mahalik, when he gets healthy, if he gets healthy from his concussion, will certainly help. Olli Jokinen, like you mentioned earlier, he's certainly happy to be going back to a team that's heading to the playoffs as opposed to spending the rest of the year in Toronto. But he's just a guy who's going to fill their depths, and it's a solid team from top to bottom in the lineup. But they're certainly going to have a hard time getting out of that Central Division if they do end up playing the Blackhawks in the first round. Because I think if you're comparing which team got better at the trade deadline, I think you would give Chicago the edge over the Blues right now.
Yeah, I mean not only that, but the overall team experience. I mean, sure, there's some new pieces, but the Blackhawks, they know how to play in the playoffs. Speaking of the Blackhawks, there was all this speculation about Patrick Sharp and certain rumors. One, I guess, obviously, did you buy into those rumors? And no move was obviously made for Patrick Sharp, and a move I think that's strong because they really will need him come playoff time, Sean.
Yeah, and I think any kind of big moves, coming out of Chicago, we'll see over the summer once some extensions kick in, and some players like Brandon Saad, for example, get contract extensions going forward. I mean, there was talk of not only Sharp, but also maybe Johnny Oduya being on the move as well. But I think right now, acquiring Tiemann, acquiring Vermette, Stan Bowman's going all in for one last cup run, and then they'll reassess over the summer. Obviously, most likely going to have to shed some salary depending on how much the cap increases or declines, and then take a run at it next year. They certainly have a lot of young pieces with, like I mentioned, Saad, but also Peibu Teravainen coming up as well. So even if they don't win a cup this season, and they do have to ship out some names like Sharp over the summertime, I still think they'll be in good shape for the future.
Sean, you're from Long Island. I mean, last year the Islanders were blasted by the media for their Thomas Vanek trade, where they didn't get enough back. But in 2015, it's a different story. I mean, the team's a really successful team, winning a lot of games, looking to be a real contender going into the playoffs. They've locked up Nick Leddy for another 7 years. Have the fortunes of the island on the island changed? Because they made some nice moves today.
Yeah, I was a big fan of the pickup of Michael Neuwirth. He was a guy who was actually traded for Yaroslav Halak last year at the deadline. And Chad Johnson, they signed him over the summer. He had a great year in Boston backing up Tuukka Rask. But this year he's just struggled with the Islanders. And the way Michael Neuwirth has played the last month or so on a terrible Sabres team kind of shows you, he's having a great season. And, having a one-two combo of Halak and Neuwirth will certainly suit the Islanders well going forward as they go for the Metropolitan Division crown. And that team, they're very, very balanced. They still have to get, they're still going to get Kyle Posta back hopefully in a couple of weeks, so that'll be a nice post trade deadline pickup for them. But top to bottom, the job Claude Snow has done there, it has been fantastic, and they're deep, they're balanced, and they're a team that's beaten a lot of good teams this season, and they're certainly going to be a threat once the playoffs come.
The other move I like that they made is they got Tyler Kennedy from the Sharks, so they add more scoring and more depth, and that's really what it all comes down to come playoff times, Sean. So great work by Garth Snow for a guy that's been blasted by the media, as I said, for the past couple of years. So really excited to see the Islanders going forward for a team that has such history in the NHL.
Yeah, I mean, look, you look at teams that win the Stanley Cup every season, what do they have? They have great depth, they have great scoring from their depth. and taking up a guy like Kennedy, who he's been, he had some good years in Pittsburgh, and he's been okay with San Jose, but you can never have enough bodies, especially guys who have been experienced in the playoffs on your roster going forward.
Sean, Nashville, they didn't make any moves today. Is that good for them, or should they have picked someone up going forward? Because a lot of people of them are picking them as the perennial Stanley Cup winner, and no moves made. I can understand why, but they may regret it come, I guess, the playoff time.
Yeah, I guess it's just a matter of, like you mentioned earlier, what the prices were and who was out there. I mean, they did pick up Mike Santorelli and Cody Franson a couple weeks ago in that Ole opening deal. Bringing those two guys back who were Predators previously, certainly fills a couple holes for them. But as long as Pekka is healthy, as long as James Neal is scoring, as long as Shea Weber is on the blue line, this team is loaded, and they're going to probably be one of the favorites coming out of the Western Conference.
Speaking of favorites, after the trade deadline's now come and gone, Sean, have you changed your thoughts on a potential Stanley Cup matchup?
Before the season, I had LA and Montreal, and I might switch Montreal to Tampa Bay just because I like the Coburn deal just for this season. I know they gave up a pick and Radko Gudas, but I think this season Coburn could fit in nicely there. So I'm going to stick with LA just because they've been coming on of late, and they're a team that we've seen it so many times before where they just at this point in the year really turn things around and get going once the postseason starts. But in the East, I may be slightly leaning towards Tampa over Montreal, especially if the Canadiens if their scoring woes continue, because Tampa certainly has a big arsenal up front, which is going to be very tough to stop, and certainly a fine goalie in Ben Bishop.
Speaking of Tampa, Sean, I mean, they are a very good team, but not a lot of people seems to be talking about them. I mean, that's something that's got to woe into Tampa's favor going into the playoffs.
Yeah, we haven't really seen this full Tampa team in a playoff series, because remember last year they didn't have Ben Bishop. Right. He was out for that series with the Canadiens, and they got swept. So now those guys are a little bit of experience underneath their belts and have another year under them. And certainly you've seen the seasons from guys like Kucherov and Palat and obviously Steven Stamkos and Callahan. I mean, a number of guys are having great seasons, and certainly they're hoping Jonathan Drouin turns things on as far as his goal scoring, which really hasn't been there this season. But adding a guy like Colburn, an experienced guy who can settle in on their blue line, doesn't have to be the guy back there, I think will serve them well.
Sean, now that the trade deadline is over, how would you describe the 2015 NHL trade deadline? Because to me it seemed like the good teams got better, and the weaker teams, well, they didn't do much to improve. So, no real balance and power has changed to me in the NHL.
Yeah, there certainly was a seller's market. There were a lot of high prices paid if you're looking at the value of draft picks and first round and second round picks going for players for either rentals or guys who have another year on their deal. But certainly teams were like you mentioned earlier. Some teams took the advantage of getting a jump start on the deadline and making their deals before Monday and kind of getting ahead of the game. And I think we might see that in the future, where teams GMs assess their team, check out the market, see who's available, and just kind of go from there and get those pieces in earlier to just kind of get things going before the deadline arrives.
Well, Sean, I'm going to thank you for coming on. Before I let you go, though, I guess tell everyone where they can contact you and check out your stuff and what you got coming up on the Puck Daddy blog.
Well, we're going to have our Puck Daddy trade deadline grades sometime on the site tonight. Just kind of grading, giving all 30 teams a letter grade as far as their deadline deals kind of over the past week or so, what deals they made or didn't make. And you can just check us out, Puck Daddy Yahoo Sports, and follow me on Twitter at Sean_Leahy.
All right, Sean, thanks for coming on today. And that is going to do it for today's episode. That's it. Peace out, everyone.